I think every choice in life that is important is a choice between love and fear.
Hmm.
Every choice in life.
You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward.
for inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to step away from what we originally planned to talk about. We just returned from the Wild Goose Festival in North Carolina and had an incredible time. But we are going to push that content and interview till next week because we felt like we needed to take a moment and acknowledge what took place last Saturday in Butler, Pennsylvania. Former President Donald Trump was shot at and struck in the ear by a would-be assassin. Because of the gravity of this moment, Missy and I want to dedicate this entire episode towards those events. But more importantly, we invited political analysis and person of deep faith, Matthew Dowd, to come on the show this week to talk about what took place in Pennsylvania, to provide thoughtful analysis and to help us understand what is going on in this country that brought us to this point. It is an incredible episode, so please stay tuned. We'll be back. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well, and you?
Well, I was really hoping we could spend this episode still riding the high from our attendance at the Wild Goose Fest.
Right, it was so great.
Last weekend, it was so much fun.
So fun.
But alas,
Stuff happens.
stuff happens. So as we were getting ready to participate in the sweetest little ordination
So sweet.
ritual that we've ever been a part
Absolutely.
of last Saturday during the Wild Goose Fest, our phones blew up.
Yep.
The Tom Wamsgans fan club group text that we have with our children
Now,
just
you may have
blew
to
up.
explain
Well,
what that
that's the
means.
name of our family group
Okay.
text, Tom Wamsgans fan club. Which, if you haven't watched Succession, then you're not in the know and you won't understand it.
Right.
But it's a great new name for a group text.
Sure.
Anywho, so our Tom Wamsgans fan club group text just blew up with news that the former president had been shot or shot at.
Right.
And so we decided this week we needed to pivot. This is a big moment. This is an important and impactful moment for our country and for all of us as citizens to stop and talk about.
Yeah. So after we got the text from our boys, I went to the usual news outlets, the Times, the Post, CNN, and sure enough, there had been shots fired in Butler, Pennsylvania at a Trump campaign rally. We began to try to figure out what was going on. I was really surprised by kind of the visceral reaction that I had because it took me straight back to 1981 in my childhood when the news broke that President Ronald Reagan had been shot in Washington, D.C. I can remember sitting in Walter Reed Elementary School.
Walter Reed, they get so much press from you.
They do. It's just so bad they don't exist any longer.
doesn't?
No,
It doesn't?
It's a warehouse now.
Oh, well, that's so sad.
I know.
Rip Walter Reed Elementary School.
Exactly. Fighting Cardinals all the way. So I was sitting there at Reed Elementary School in Mrs. Bates' gym class when our principal, Mr. Cagle, came across the intercom system and had notified us about shots fired at the president at that time. And while I was still in elementary school and not fully understanding what was taking place, it certainly came upon me the significance and poignancy of that moment. Just seeing the looks on Mrs. Bates' face, hearing kind of the tremor in Mr. Cagle's voice, and then looking to my other teachers throughout the day, I just knew this was a big deal.
Right.
And so when the events at Butler happened on Saturday, and I was having all these memories flood back, I was just reminded, even though Donald Trump is not our current president, but former president, how poignant this moment was going to be in our nation's history. And it just kind of took me back to this vulnerability that we have as a country and as a people. And it was really just shocking to me, just kind of the feelings that I had at that particular moment.
It does. It's just a reminder, like you said, of how vulnerable we all are and how rhetoric can take over.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of scary,
Yeah.
to say that you and I, or you and, our neighbor can disagree vehemently about things.
Right.
But what is it that makes someone decide to pick up a weapon?
Yeah.
So a reminder of that, and what our words can do, and also a reminder of what a lack of gun control can possibly be party to.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a lot of feelings, a lot of just intensity in the moment. I vaguely remember Reagan being shot. I was pretty young at the time, but it's a very sobering moment of, we've got to take a step back, and we've got to think about what division, what hatred, what language is doing to us.
Yeah. And what I appreciate about some of the comments that came out, especially immediately after the news broke on Saturday, was people from both parties talking about the significance of this moment and the need for tempering our political rhetoric these days, because it has been ratcheted up so drastically in this country right now that the divisiveness seems to be at an all-time high. And it is not illogical to conclude that the rhetoric that we have been hearing over the last several decades has led to these moments of political violence. We certainly saw it on January 6th at the insurrection of the U.S. Capitol. We saw it this weekend in Butler, Pennsylvania. And so when the news broke, we began to talk about who can we have on the pod this week to do an incredible analysis of the situation, talk us through the importance of political rhetoric, and then also what it means moving forward, not only as a people of faith, but also as a country at large. And so we both went straight to one of the greatest minds and people of faith that we know, and that's Matthew Dowd.
Yeah, we were so excited that he was willing and able to come on and just have a conversation with us, helping us to parse out our feelings and answer some of our questions, and talk about kind of where do we go from here, and what is the future of the election in our country hold, especially in light of the events of this weekend.
Right.
So I'm really thankful for his insight, and can't wait to share it with the audience.
Yeah. So Missy and I sat down this week with one of the best political minds in the business right now, who's also a deep person of faith. And we just think the world of Matthew Dowd. So stay tuned. Missy and I will be right back with Matthew Dowd. Hey friends, it's Mitch Randall, CEO of Good Faith Media. We've been hard at work producing a new podcast for our friends over at Free Mom Hugs.
Well, Mitch, disclaimer.
Yeah?
You and Cliff have been hard at work. I'm mostly just here for color commentary. Let's just be honest about that.
Very, very true.
But for those who may not know, the nonprofit Free Mom Hugs, founded by Sarah Cunningham, empowers the world to celebrate the LGBTQIA+ community through visibility, education, and conversation.
And perhaps you've heard about their work. They do indeed offer free hugs and high fives. They stand in at weddings, all of it helping people who have experienced rejection for being who they are.
Their new podcast is titled Pride 365, Keeping Queer Kids Alive. A new episode will drop each Wednesday during the month of June, which is Pride Month.
But Pride 365 is about more than a month. It's about a movement and the moms keeping queer kids alive.
The first episode drops June 5th, and it's hosted by Free Mom Hugs' very own saints, Sarah Cunningham and Katrina Cobb.
Pride 365, Keeping Queer Kids Alive, a new podcast produced by Good Faith Media for Free Mom Hugs.
Learn more at freemomhugs.org and goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest with us. Matthew Dowd is one of his generation's most creative analysts, visionaries, and political strategists. He previously worked as chief strategist for the 2004 Bush-Cheney campaign and is currently a contributing analyst for MSNBC and a best-selling author. Matthew, welcome back to Good Faith Weekly.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, Matthew. Thank you for joining us. So we all know what we're here to talk about. Last weekend, news broke that just shook us all. Former President Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt while campaigning in Butler, Pennsylvania. So the investigation is obviously still ongoing, but this moment just seems exceptionally critical. So before we kind of talk about the political rhetoric and what may happen going down the line, I just want to know, what was your reaction on a personal level? How did you feel, and what was your initial response?
Well, that's a great question, because I think we all should be asking ourselves that question specifically, how it was our own response to it. And it sent me into a place of reflection and contemplation, actually, of what has been examining my own role in raising the temperature or causing disagreement or not treating everybody with dignity. And so I'm glad the former president, it was fine, and I'm glad he's able to continue his campaign. But I think more importantly, it should all cause us to reflect of how are we acting and what are we contributing to the toxic nature of the culture we're in? Because if we're really honest with ourselves, I think we all contribute it to a degree. I mean, obviously, my Christian faith tells me I'm flawed and I have to constantly re-examine myself. But I think this is a good moment, whether you're a Christian faith or not, to re-examine our own attitudes and actions, and how do we add to a culture that seems to be filled with so much hate.
Well said. And Matthew, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I'm going to admit something to you and to the audience at this point. Over the last few days, I've really been struggling, because we've all heard the calls for the tempering down of rhetoric, and you articulated it very well just seconds ago. But I am struggling, and honestly, because I do think that a second Trump presidency is dangerous to democracy. So my question for you is this: how can we avoid becoming what we detest, while at the same time staying true and honest about the situation? I agree wholeheartedly about tempering down the rhetoric, but at the same time, I think we're still at a point where we're facing an existential crisis that democracy is teetering on the brink. So how do we balance those two?
Well, it's a great question. We should all stand up and enunciate our beliefs and what we think is a coming perilous situation, or we're in a perilous situation and could become more dangerous. I think about it this way when I think about this. If you turn on the weatherman and he warns you a hurricane's coming, and he's telling you a hurricane's coming, and you have to either evacuate or batten down the thing or put boards up and all that, you don't blame the hurricane. You don't blame the weatherman for the hurricane. Right? The weatherman is just telling you what's this, and you can prepare for it or not, or deal with it or not. And that, to me, is this moment we're in, which is, I think warning people about what Donald Trump would mean in a second term is totally fine. He's enunciated it himself on what things he would do that are autocratic and that would hurt our democracy and hurt many groups of people in our country, include the most historically disenfranchised groups of people in our country, which immigrants, people of color, women, historically in our country have been treated bad. He would treat them. He seems to want to go back and treat them that way. I think warning people about that and saying this is what we think would happen from a principled place is fine. I think where we get in trouble is if we start treating fellow Americans. If a fellow American is planning on voting for Donald Trump, there may be a variety of reasons for that, and we may disagree with that, but treating them in a disrespectful or of a place that doesn't treat them with dignity, I think only makes matters worse. So I think the warning and the conversation about what a second term of Donald Trump would mean is fine. And I think, and you can do that in ways that say a peril for our democracy. But I think when we cast about and start impugning the intentions and the goodwill of fellow Americans who might choose to look at it differently, I think that's where we get into a problem.
Would you say that a good line might be make certain that we never use rhetoric that dehumanizes the other or an opponent, and not looking at them as a villain or someone to detest, but really as a true opponent in this sharing of ideas, whether that is politics or faith? Is that a good way of looking at this and moving forward to make certain that there is a sharing of ideas, and when concerns are valid and authentic, that we have the ability to communicate that without demonizing or dehumanizing other people?
I think that I agree with that in part, though I think it's okay. It's okay if a particular participant in the process is doing demonic things. You
Okay.
can demonize a person that's doing demonic things.
Yeah.
I don't think that includes voters and just regular
Right.
people
Sure,
in
sure, sure.
Oklahoma or Texas or Michigan or wherever it happen to be are those people. They might be they've got invested in this in their own way. But I think participants who knowingly spread vitriol and cruelty and have enunciated policies that will be that, I think it's okay to label that what it is. And it doesn't mean you have to call somebody Hitler or Stalin or whatever
Right.
those things. So I think once you get to that level, you're actually not being effective with your communication, but enunciating the way it is. I also think there's another thing that I think that is going on right now. It says, to me, I think every choice in life that is important is a choice between love and fear. Every choice in life is a choice between love and fear. How do we relate to the people we care about is either a choice of going by a fear we have or going by a love we have. And I think that's where our politics is. And I think if we resort to appeals to fear, we're only making the matter worse if
Right.
that's all we do. Now, granted, there are fears that we could have about the future of our democracy, but I think it has to be coupled with, why are we doing this? Because it's because what we love. We love our fellow Americans, even the people that are going to vote on the opposite side of us. We love. We're actually, the funny thing about the people that are against Donald Trump those are actually people that care more about the Trump voters than Donald Trump cares.
Right.
I mean, you and I and anybody who thinks Donald Trump is a danger, we care more about his voters than he does.
Very true.
And I think so. If we're in a fear place, and a lot of people are in a fear place right now, the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we move the conversation to a place of an appeal that's based in love?
Yeah.
And that, I think, is incumbent upon the people in this space, you and I, to do that, because the media is not going to do that, because fear works in the media, and most conversations don't do that. But if we're with anybody individually or on this conversation we're in, I think, how do we move it to an appeal that's based in love and not in fear?
I love that wisdom. That is incredible. Well, Matthew, now I'm going to do something that I hated, and that is when parishioners would quote me to me, or my kids would quote me to me as they were growing up.
Go for it.
You wrote on July the 11th on X, formerly as Twitter, before the assassination attempt. Many folks consistently get presidential campaigns wrong. They think that they are about issues and who gives more extended answers on issues. Presidential campaigns are about values and the ability to communicate in a simple, clear, consistent, resonating way. And the most important value today is strength. If campaigns were about issues, Hillary would have won in 2016, Kerry would have won in 2004, and Carter would have won in 1980. So Here's my question, Matthew. When Trump raised his fist in the air after that bullet struck his ear and shouted, "Fight," was the election over?
No, but I think it wasn't over, because I think we're so polarized, and we're in such a situation that for everything that's happened, for all the conversations that we've had over the last 3 weeks, the race has basically moved 1 or 2 points total. And so the margin for this race is being traded in. Nobody's going to win this race by more than 4 points. So if you think about that, it's going to be 3 or 4 points total in the margin. So we're trading in such a small amount. I think what it does is it solidifies Donald Trump's support among his base even more, which is important because motivating the base is important. I worry in this election. I think Donald Trump has the advantage today. If the election were held today, Donald Trump would be elected president of the United States. Luckily, the election isn't held today because I think his base is much more motivated pro Donald Trump than Joe Biden's base is motivated pro Joe Biden.
Right.
And strength is a part of that. I think there's many voters in the Biden coalition, or I would say, let's consider it the broader coalition, which is the not pro-Biden, but the anti-Trump coalition, which is bigger than the pro-Biden coalition. That Biden, his debate performance and other interviews, and then what happened with Donald Trump and him raising his fist and fight, I think on that important value of strength, Donald Trump has an advantage on it right now.
Right.
And Joe Biden, if he's the nominee, and it seems to me that's what he's going to be, though we could discuss whether or not that's the right place to be right now, because I think two things you need is ability to communicate and strength. And Joe Biden right now has a problem with both of those things, I believe.
Right.
I think this election is still going to be decided on a small number of thousands of votes. Anything could happen in the course of this. We don't know. I mean, we didn't know if Trump was going to get shot at, 3 days ago. We didn't know, other things that'll happen in the world writ large. So I don't think it's over, but I do think Donald Trump has an advantage.
So, Matthew, I am an eternal pessimist and am just working under the assumption that the election has been decided and am trying to prepare for the worst as far as what that might mean. So help me in this. If Trump is elected, what can we expect? Tell us how Project 2025 works into that. I know he has kind of tried to say, oh, no, that's not me, but much evidence tells us otherwise. So what could another Trump term look like?
Well, he's kind of told us what it's going to be. Donald Trump's own words should be a warning to us. I mean, he said he wants to be dictator for a day. Those are his exact words. Nobody ever wants to be a dictator for one day, because if they're a dictator for a day, they like it, right, and they're going to do it for another day.
I mean, that's what I told Mitch when we got married, and he learned. So,
29 years later, I still bow down.
That's right. It was just supposed to be a day. It was just supposed to be that wedding day.
It's like me seeing a plate of homemade chocolate chip cookies, and I'm going to say, I'm only going to have one of those cookies while the plate sits there.
Right.
That's dictator for a day.
Right.
So I think he knows, and all of the Project 2025 stuff reinforces that. I mean, there's a lot of crazy, right-wing things in there about, getting rid of reproductive freedoms, a whole host of things in there. But basically at its basis is empowering Donald Trump to be a dictator and running the government as one person. And that's what they want to do with the civilian employees. That's what they want to do with the Justice Department. That all of those things all point to one thing, which is a basis for autocracy. And that ought to be very scary for everyone. I mean, here's my question. I think it's scary. I hope we don't have to go through it. We may have to go through it, but I think questions that I think that could put a damper on how much he can get away with is, what is the composition of Congress? Because it's a lot different if the Senate becomes Republican and the House stays Republican, what that means, because the levers of power will then be all turned on with Donald Trump. So much depends on that. And then I think also, as Donald Trump is such a narcissist and he wants to be liked for all of this crazy stuff he says and all this stuff. He wants the media to like him. I mean, he constantly goes back, even though he insults them and says all of that. He wants to be liked by other people in the world. He wants even though he stumbles his way through things and constantly screws up. I think they're part of what may control Donald Trump is his own ego and narcissism. But I wouldn't count on that as a controlling. I'm just saying from my own psychological look at it, Donald Trump may be controlled by just his own ego and wanting to be liked. But I hope we don't have to get to that scenario. But, I tell people, our country is, we've been an imperfect path towards a democracy throughout our own country, right? We fought and won. Nearly 1 million of our brothers and sisters in the South and the North fought in a civil war that was designed to end slavery that seemed clear. And then within 10 or 12 years of that, Jim Crow laws were getting enacted, and we were right back, many ways, back to where we were prior to all those amendments and everything that happened. And then 20 years later, we're excluding Chinese people from our country. And then 30 years later, we're saying the only countries that we want people from are from basically European countries. And then we lock up Japanese people during World War II. I mean, and then we have fought numerous wars that didn't really have a basis in reality, where we lost trillions of dollars and thousands of men and women in the course of this. So do I want to go through an experiment? Will we survive Donald Trump in this? No, because I think a lot of people will be harmed. Most of us on this broadcast, you and I, we can probably get through it because of our financial standing or our color, or where we happen to live. But there's a whole bunch of groups that will be seriously harmed in a Donald Trump presidency. And so will our country survive? I think so. Will people be harmed in front of us, and will it cause great hurt? Yeah.
Is that not the answer you wanted?
No, you mentioned, Biden's campaign as well. Whether he should or whether he shouldn't continue is up for, we could debate that. But at the end of the day, it's looking like he is the person on the other side of the ticket. So what are some tangible ways that we can, as a people, communicate that this is an election of democracy versus maybe not? And we need to unite to promote and preserve democracy.
I thought in the aftermath of the debate, when he had part of his thing he did in Raleigh, I thought they finally got it and they knew what the campaign, and he was aware of what they needed to do. To me, what you have to do is give voters, and we have to do it in our conversations, because you and I are going to have conversations with people that are thinking about voting for Donald Trump. I have people in my own family that are contemplating voting for Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. Hitting them full force with a political argument about Biden is so much better than Donald Trump and Donald is not going to work. What we have to do is give people a permission structure to believe what they believe about Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. We have to give them the permission that they can say, I don't know if he's up to the job. We have to allow people to have that belief, because that's what actually their reality is telling them. So us arguing about the reality is, I think, a fool's errand. So we have to give people the permission structure. And I thought Joe Biden did this when he's had this statement in Raleigh. He hasn't repeated it, but I think when he said, I know I'm old, and I know I don't talk as well as I used to, and I don't walk as fast as I used to, but I'm going to tell you the truth, and I'm going to work every day on behalf of the country. I think that's the argument. We have to basically say, yeah, we know Joe Biden isn't as where he's been 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But Joe Biden's going to wake up every day and he's going to be surrounded by people that care about our country. Donald Trump only cares about himself. I mean, to me, it's actually the most basic Christian argument you could make to somebody. Do you want to support somebody that believes in something higher than themselves, or do you want to support somebody that only believes in themselves, which is ultimately what Christianity is we vest ourselves in something bigger than ourselves as opposed to ourselves, because we believe our own selves are flawed, so we have to vest ourselves in something greater than ourselves. That's what this election is about. And Joe Biden, for all his flaws and for all the problems with it, one, will be surrounded by very smart people that care about the country. Joe Biden cares about the country, even though he's not throwing the fastball as fast as he used to throw it. And Donald Trump only cares about himself.
And he could never throw a fastball. Let's just be honest about that. So
I have doubts about his golf game too, but that's my own.
I don't know what would make you say that.
Well, Matthew, before we let you go and ask our final question, you mentioned history a moment ago, and I do think we are at an incredible crossroads right now as a country. I think about the Civil War, and I think about that incredible line that President Lincoln uttered when he appealed to the better angels of our citizenship. I think about the civil rights movement and Dr. King suggesting that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. I think we're at one of those moments right now. I know the American people are up to the task. And I also promise you, I will not quote you back to you a year from now when we have you back on the show. What's your gut tell you? Are we able to rise up and resist the temptation of authoritarianism and power and strength and truly rise up and believe in ourselves to let democracy continue?
So I believe the long arc of the universe bends towards justice, but I also believe that we go through moments when it doesn't feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that I believe that in the end, love conquers hate, but there are moments when hate wins battles. And I don't know if as a country that I don't know what the answer in this moment is. We might need humbling. We might need humbling in the globe. Our arrogance has been so big around the globe in 100 years that we think we have all the right answers. We think what we know is better. We think we can tell people what to do. And this, I think, moment is incredibly humbling for that, that we actually should see ourselves as an integral part of a global community, as opposed to beat our chest, we're the greatest country in the world. I love America, but I think that arrogance has needed some tending to. So I don't know what's going to happen in this moment. I believe in the long term, justice and peace and love wins. Right overcomes wrong. Right overcomes evil. But that's in the long term. In the short term, I don't know what path the good Lord has for us. Unfortunately, maybe we need to learn some lessons again so we can be better. I don't know.
Well, not overly optimistic, but real. And that's what we appreciate about you.
I mean, I'm
Matthew
optimistic in the long term.
Right.
I'm incredibly concerned in the short term.
Yeah. Very well said.
Which is so consistent with what you said to us last time you were on the show. I went back and looked at the notes, and that's pretty much verbatim what you told us last time. So congrats to you for consistency.
Thank you.
Well, Matthew Dowd, thank you so much for joining us this week. It's been a difficult week. Continues to be a critical time in the life of our country, and people of faith are just trying to get their mind around this and hold on to some hope for the future. And you contribute to that and offer that hope. So thank you so much. But before we let you go, Matthew, we've got one last question that we ask every one of our guests, and Missy has the honor of asking it.
So Matthew, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
So it's interesting. Before this conversation happened, there's a Bible verse that I've been reading and that I've been thinking about. It's from Isaiah, and I'm sure you all know it. It's the one where it says, "Then I heard the voice of the Lord who said, 'Whom shall I send? Whom shall go before us?' And then I answered, 'Send me, Lord, I am here.'" Right? And that to me is what this moment demands. We're looking for somebody else to solve our problem when we should be saying, "Send me, Lord, here I am." And that means, here I am. How do I deal with my next door neighbor? How do I have a conversation about politics? Can I register somebody to vote? Can I help support a candidate? As the famous poet whose birthday was last week, interestingly, said, "We're the ones we're waiting for." That to me is what Isaiah was saying in that quote that I have actually been thinking about a lot this week. So, if anybody wants to know what the answer is, to me, it's not Joe Biden. It's not whomever. It's, here I am, send me.
Love it.
That'll preach.
That'll preach. Absolutely. Well, Matthew Dowd, you are welcome on the show anytime. Thank you so much for your wisdom. Make certain that you follow Matthew on X, formerly known as Twitter, because he's got incredible wisdom that he shares each and every day and some factoids that you would not know about. So, Matthew, thanks so much for being on the show this week.
My pleasure. Thank you all for all you do.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. Missy and I just finished up our conversation with Matthew Dowd. And Matthew always brings incredible analysis and thoughtful reflection, and he didn't disappoint again. I always really enjoy speaking with Matthew. And in this case, I was so glad he was able to join the pod.
Yeah, I was really grateful. We were really seeking out a voice like his of wisdom from a political and historical standpoint, but also from a faith background. And we really value his thoughts. And I have 2 pages of notes
Well, of course you do.
from our conversation. But really his more to tell just left you and I both like, I don't know, just thinking about that. And it's so funny when someone can bring something from scripture that you've heard 1,000 times before, but yet when it's communicated with passion, with honesty, with conviction, it brings new light. And I felt like his more to tell really did for both of us. We talked about that. It made an impact.
It did. I'm so glad he brought that particular text to the forefront, because as soon as he was recalling that particular passage in scripture where God is calling out, "Whom shall I send?" it took me immediately back to my seminary days and my Old Testament professor, one of my favorite professors in the world, Boo Heflin.
Aw, Boo Heflin.
We love Boo Heflin.
Aw, Boo Heflin and Walter Reed getting so many shout outs from you all the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, when Dr. Heflin retold this story in class many, many moons ago, he brought up the fact that a lot of times when this text is taught or preached over, that seems to be that of a booming voice of God, asking the question to the masses, whom shall I send, as a clarion call, so to speak. But Dr. Heflin, who was just a gentle soul, interpreted it a little different for us. And he said, just imagine God looking over his people with disappointment, because we forget what is actually going on in that moment. Israel and Judah have sinned and turned their back away from God. And it's almost as though God is sitting there with head in hands, exhaling the words, "Whom shall I send?" And as that exhale goes out into the world, it's the prophet Isaiah who gives answer to that call. But it's not only Isaiah, Missy, it's Amos, it's Hosea, it's Jeremiah. Because of the context that's going on in that moment in history, God's people have turned their back upon God's ways, and injustice is permeating the land. The poor are being oppressed. The marginalized are being pushed further away. And God has had enough. And so God calls with that exhausted breath. And it's these prophets who come and deliver this message of justice. It is a message and a reminder that we have a shared humanity as a people. And as people of faith, we have a responsibility to speak out and to stand up and to call out for justice. And the way to do that, as Matthew reminded us, is through the message of love.
Right. And he said in the beginning, when he first heard the news of the shooting, he said, how have I contributed, or how have we collectively contributed? How do my words and actions affect these things? And I thought that was a really interesting kind of reaction and response to have. But in relation to what he said at the end about Isaiah, whom shall I send? He said, we're looking for someone else to solve our problems.
Right.
And when we should really be saying, here I am, how can I do better? How can I contribute, to affect positive change through love? Like he mentioned, we operate out of love and fear. He said we need to see more operating out of love, at a place of love and not fear. And so, I thought he did a really great job of framing the conversation for us and kind of how do we move forward, knowing that we don't know what the future is going to hold. Our country is teetering in many ways, but how we react, how we respond, how we are proactive going forward is important. I liked also what he was saying about, supporting someone who believes in something higher than themselves, as opposed to someone who believes in themselves. It just reminded me of, Mr. Rogers when he says,
Mr. Rogers,
look for the helpers.
Yeah.
And I think if we can do nothing else, we don't know what this outcome of a presidential election is going to be, nor, many things going on in our world. But, look for the helpers and see who those are, and also be a helper.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you said that, because that is so important. Not only should we look for those helpers and listen to those voices who are talking about ways in which we can be better human beings in this world to one another, but also not forgetting we have that responsibility to be a helper ourselves, because so often we get caught up in the milieu of rhetoric and difficult situations that we forget, while we're searching for comfort and wisdom, that we have a responsibility to be that helper to other people. So, God, what a great point.
Yeah, I thought so too. So as we trudge on,
Yes.
nervous about what's going to happen, uncertain of our country's future, I do feel like we are at a moment where we have a decision to make as a people. Do we want to keep fighting for democracy? Do we want to keep fighting for this grand experiment that we haven't always gotten right? But we're trying. And for me, it's terrifying, but we trudge on.
Yeah. We are certainly not a perfect union, but we are always in constant search of becoming a more perfect union. And we've gotten it wrong in a lot of instances throughout our history. There's no debating that reality.
Right.
But I still believe in what President Lincoln challenged us to rise up to prior to the Civil War and during the Civil War, and we mentioned it in the interview with Matthew, that we really look to our better angels, and that we stand up and that we rise up as a people to move forward, searching for justice and love and hope and peace, not only for ourselves, but for everybody.
That's the thing. What's going to move our country forward in such a way that it's going to help and allow all people to succeed?
Yeah.
And to be happy and have health and happiness. So I'm not telling you what to do, but I'm telling you to look at those things.
Well, I totally agree, and I appreciate that wisdom. And we really don't know what's going to happen after this week. Lots still to unfold, not only during this election, but even after the election. So we just keep trudging forward and keep doing what we can, but we can't disengage. We have to be a part of the solution, and we have to be the helper that Mr. Rogers challenged us to be.
I agree.
And listen for that whisper, because God still calls for us to be that voice in the world.
Absolutely.
Well, we're going to be back next week and hopefully talking about a lot better issues.
Yeah, we have some fun stories from Wild Goose, so you'll want
Such
to
a
be
fun
sure
time.
and come back.
Absolutely. Such a fun time. So until next week, keep living good faith. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.